CFB Paint back again for another episode. We've got some surprise shake-up news. We've got a couple things to cover and are back to our usual, or twice now annual preseason view of coaching, hot seat. Who do we expect maybe there to be changes to be made? We'll get into it. First of all, we're going to start in Chicago, Illinois, or better said, Evanston, Illinois. Northwestern fired their coach amidst allegations of hazing, of some racial insensitivity. Things, I think, kind of got wild there. Corey, I don't know if you want to set the scene for our listeners. For those that maybe haven't heard the story, you can maybe quickly summarize what's happened and the fallout from it, and then we'll discuss.
So a player approached the university with allegations of hazing that happened within the organization and a couple other things. Those hazings were varied everything from like sexual hazing, like people were getting. I'm not gonna put it pleasantly. People were getting, humped at one point in time by the seniors. They had hazing on the freshmen, where freshmen were having to be slid around the locker room naked, and there's talks of people having to do quarterback and center, freshman quarterback and center naked, play football, and that center exchange, like not ideal things. So he made allegations to the university. The university hired a third party and investigated. They found that those allegations to be largely substantiated by the interviews that they had done, and so the university decided to give Pat Fitzgerald a 2-week suspension. Okay, well, he's not really with the team anyway right now. It's the off season. It's the dead period, so it's not going to affect recruiting. It's kind of a slap on the wrist. And so a few days later, the school newspaper reported independently, said, hey, we've talked to this person that had investigated, and we've talked to another player who corroborates a former player that corroborates all these things. And they come out, and they are the ones that said, we find out what the allegations were publicly from the newspaper. And as soon as that gets released, the president's like, we're going to go review the suspension, or we may not have been harsh enough on this. And because the paper kind of is like, oh, we don't know if you were harsh enough on this. And then a few days later, they come out saying, we're firing you. Pastor Fitzgerald has hired a lawyer saying, going against this, trying to claim it's not for cause. I think there's no way he wins that. They might settle for just because they don't want to do anything. But honestly, you're in charge of the locker room, you're in charge of your culture, your environment, and apparently, there were motions that were made by not Pat Fitzgerald. What's his name? Sorry, is Pat Fitzgerald?
Pat Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, messing in with the quarterback from Tampa Bay at the time, but there were motions made by Pat Fitzgerald during their practices and stuff like that that were used in some of their hazings that said to some of the players that, oh, he knows what's going on and he's kind of approving it. Like when a freshman would do something bad, he would do what they called the strut clap, like this, and that's what everybody would do when they were about to go do something, mess around with a freshman and give him a hard time. I'm not going to go into the details, but he would do that. And so they're like, hey, if he's doing it, he clearly knows what's going on and he's okay with it because he's calling this freshman out in practice. And so there's some indication that he did know what was going on in the culture, even though he may claim that he doesn't and stuff like that. And so as a coach, you're responsible for that. You're responsible for the culture, and eventually anything that happens in there, whether it was on your watch or not, and you don't know about it or you do, you're still responsible for it, and it's going to land on you. And honestly, I think they didn't do the right thing at first. I think they're doing the right thing now. And it sucks to be in that position because, he's a former linebacker that's, heralded by that school and brought in and is the best winning coach since 1936 for them. So it sucks to be in that position for the university. It sucks to be in that position for the victims, and it sucks to be in that position because you were in charge for Pat Fitzgerald. So it's just a crappy situation all around.
Yeah, I don't know. Brian, did you have thoughts on it or commentary?
No, the only thing I'd add is I know the higher-ups at the university got a little bit of hate on social media and online because they didn't act quicker, not only for the weak punishment they initially gave, but also the delay and then getting to the firing because they're on vacation. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I work and I take vacations, but then sometimes you have to step away from vacations for things that are a really big deal. You're getting paid for a high leverage job. That's a possibility of something that's going to come along with it. But no, I'm right there with Corey. Like, coach, whether he knows or not, and to me, like I don't mind giving Pat Fitzgerald the benefit of the doubt of like, oh, I saw players doing this and I just started to imitate what my players do because I'm trying to keep up with hip young 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Uh, but regardless, like you're responsible for everything that goes on, whether you know about it or not, and that's on you to establish. So the right call. Already was a coach who was going to be a little bit on the hot seat going into the season, but definitely something that you need to flesh or to wash out of your program as a whole. And starting with the head coach is a good way to start, but long way to go because according to these allegations, this has been going on for quite a long time. The former player has been doing apparently gone through this at a freshman stage and is now a few years graduated. So something that's gonna take a little bit to root out, and something that each Northwestern player should seek now to kind of prove themselves, and they'll be looked at a little bit differently than they were before, and that's something that's unfortunate for them, but also what comes with the territory when you have these sort of situations.
And being in a team culture, like I mean, you guys all been in a team culture. There are things sometimes it's like it's hard to stand up to the rest of the crowd if the crowd is going one way and you think they should be going another way. And so they did have like meetings and trainings and teachings about like hazing is not allowed. And apparently there were talks from the seniors like if you guys say anything, like we're gonna get you. And like that's kind of interesting, but at the same time, like I can't imagine that everybody was going along with this. I bet you there was a certain select few that were going through along with it, and then others that were just quiet. And in this day and age, quiet is condolence, or not condolence. Quiet is confirmation, I guess. Like you're going along with it. So
Yeah, maybe I have a slightly different take because I understand, like, yeah, the head coach is responsible ultimately for everything that goes on in the program. It to me is really interesting that they, in the letter where they actually released, or the press release that they announced he'd been fired, they actually said there's no evidence that says he knew anything about it. Um, so they kind of admit, like, we don't have anything ironclad on you, but the fact that it happened and apparently was somewhat pervasive. I don't know. Like, to me, I am not excusing, especially the details are kind of, in my opinion, frankly, just weird and uncomfortable. And I understand locker room culture is maybe a little bit different. Like, I certainly was on teams where you could, if looking at just what happened without context, it would say it's hazing, it's probably inappropriate. Like, so like those things happen, and I'm not trying to dismiss them, but I think context is really important. Is all I'm saying. The other thing that, again, a buddy of mine just graduated from Northwestern University with his MBA, and he's just like the university presidents and the I don't know if it's a board of regents or the people in charge at Northwestern are like super afraid of like the criticism that they're super afraid of like a loud voice and bad PR. He gave me these examples. He says, I've had an @nu.edu email, so like a Northwestern University email as he's been a student for 3 years. Northwestern literally apologizes for everything. A tree fell on campus and an email went out saying, we recognize we need to do better. Like, so they might be a little on the soft side of things when it comes to not fearing public backlash. And that might explain the very quick shift from a 2-week suspension in the off season and in the dead of summer into a firing pretty quickly thereafter. So I just don't know. Like Corey said, it's worse. Of course, the worst situations for the victims, but also for others that are going to be impacted. Like when you get rid of that coach, everyone else on that staff now they're coaching for their jobs, and that may mean that they were complicit in this too. It's hard. I'm not throwing allegations out, but just it's a bad situation. I don't feel like anyone really wins. Although if it cleans up something that was inappropriate and potentially illegal, it might be a necessary step. So that's probably enough commentary. Unless someone else had something to add or respond to what I've said, I'm not trying to close the door on it, but maybe we just pivot now to more of a okay, what's next at Northwestern? Um, I know that you guys we've kind of briefly talked a little bit about who we think might be potential candidates to take that job. Um, and I've also heard some thrown out that I am a little surprised to hear, and some that I feel are missing. So maybe we'll start, Brian. We'll start with you. Um, who are some candidates that would be your first few calls as an athletic director?
Well, I don't know that these would be necessarily my first few calls because I think I'd swing for the fences a little bit higher than what I have on this list. But what I think are reasonable calls, I think you always got to try and get a big name, get someone who can do big things. But I think so. I've got four. Number one, you're thinking of uh, with Northwestern, probably not a team who's going to be competing to win the Big Ten. That's probably not the end goal objective. And so the type of coaches that you're looking for, perhaps ones who can do more with less. And that's something that I'm looking for as a skill set in general. So the first name I think of whenever that's the case, I think of Dave Clawson at Wake Forest. I love the offense he's been doing there for a long time. It speaks volumes about Wake Forest that they are not really sweating that they just lost the leading passer in ACC history. Like they're really comfortable with the guy they have behind, and that speaks to the offense and how things are run as a whole, making it so that that's a replaceable position. Not necessarily anybody can replace it, but Sam Hartman's going to be, for anyone else, that's a big talent loss, and they're going, we'll be okay. We're pretty comfortable with what's happening. I think Dave Clawson's a great one who could see the move. He's in the ACC now, but there's more money to be had generally in the Big Ten. So if money can be the motivating factor. I think one must for this position that I haven't mentioned is you've got to have somebody who's been a head coach before. You have culture problems. That's the thing that you need to reset. So you need somebody who's had that responsibility on their shoulders before. So that was immediately, I know there are top coordinators like a Garrett Riley or a Tommy Reese or some of these young people who are exciting and coming up. I absolutely want to get a proven head coach. The next person who I was thinking in line, more so on the culture front, and this one, I don't know if it's a great hire because he's not proven as a recruiter because he's in a different world, but it's Ken Niumatalolo, who was fired from Navy, but was the head coach at a military school, and is now doing, I don't know, he's the chancellor of
He's the
leadership.
analyst at
He's at UCLA.
Yep.
Yeah, and his title's, I don't remember what it is, something
Like
chancellor of leadership, something
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're leaning into UCLA's leaning into his experience that he has kind of in this realm, and this is a locker room that now needs leaders, needs people who will say, this is the way we do things. This is how Northwestern football is run. So to me, he's one that makes sense from that regard. He also runs a triple option offense, which is a little more gimmicky for the college football game overall, especially outside of a service academy, but something that certainly is not what defenses face on the day-to-day and can do more with less. He's shown it with smaller offensive linemen as well, and he's going to have beefier offensive linemen than he's ever had at Northwestern. So a decent chance there.
Paul Johnson did it to success at another academic powerhouse in Georgia Tech, so that'd be interesting.
Yeah, and that's not even somebody I included here. Willie Fritz is another name that occurs to me. He's coached at Tulane for quite a while now, been a head coach since 1997, so has no shortage of history with leading programs and doing a pretty decent job of it, especially his last few years at Tulane. Had a really impactful, they've been going up against UCF, going up against Cincinnati. The AAC's lost some of its talents to the Big 12, but he's been right up there at the top of them, especially this last year. Really impressive year. And they kept their quarterback, so someone who people still want to play for, even if they've had the success. I think he makes sense in that regard. Might be looking for a pay increase as well, as you're going to get a lot more at Northwestern than you're going to get at Tulane. Just that long history as well with the doing more with less. And the last one I have is Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco Mendenhall has worked both at Virginia and at BYU with some recruiting restrictions, similar to what you might have academically at Northwestern, where you may not be able to go get just anyone, but you want to uphold the nature of an academically thriving school like Virginia. and I think had a really good stop at both of those places. He seems to burn out and like lose interest. Like when he left Virginia, it was just like I just feel like I'm just done. At least that's the vibe I got from it. But nonetheless, I think somebody who could thrive given the situation or given the school that you're going to and the outside of the culture situation, the academic and recruiting and competitive environment that they have there.
Corey, who you calling?
I've seen, huh?
I just said who you calling?
Oh, like I had some of the names considered that you had, Brian. I don't like the Bronco Mendenhall pick, just because I do agree Bronco gets bored. He does have the experience at Virginia and having to recruit at a certain level, and he kind of recruits a little bit above that level because he had the academic stringence or hardship at Virginia. But I'm not. I don't think that's someone you want to go and get. You made the comment like you need to go get a head coach. I don't. If I'm a head coach, I'm not taking that position. Like that position doesn't lead anywhere unless I'm looking for if I'm an assistant coach and I'm looking to grab a quick 40 mil and be cool with that for my life and get my life set. This is you go to this position to get hired and you're going to get fired eventually. No coach is better over like a 50% win-loss record, except for Pat Fitzgerald since like 1936 or something like that. So I mean, there's no winning here and moving on to the next level. So if you have intentions to get higher, I don't think that's a place to go. I do think it's a place you can go if you have been a person that has cleaned up programs before. Jim Grove, you mentioned Wake Forest. I was like, oh, like he's a perfect fit in the fact that he went and fixed Baylor. Have him go fix this place at Northwestern. Derek Mason, who's right now on a sabbatical, but has had a chance to win at a academically challenging school in the SEC. Granted, it was Vandy. It was hard to win, but that's kind of similar to what Northwestern is and could be a good pick. If I was them, that's who I'd go. You mentioned Willie Fritz. I thought about that position, but if I'm Willie Fritz, I'm not going to Northwestern. I want to go to a good school and have a chance to do something for reals.
Yeah,
like I'm not going to get a top tier school, but if I can get a West Virginia or like a hint at some other things for later.
A little preview there.
maybe that's what I go for. It's like a school where I'm not limited in my recruiting based off the academics and based off the history of the program. So or a Pitt or something like that. I'm just throwing like that middle tier team. Maybe in Miami. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's my only thought with Willie Fritz is it's a higher step up in pay. And even if you can succeed for a couple years and you say, oh, I've got another offer, now I'm going to go somewhere where I'm not as handcuffed to academics, and like West Virginia, like a great example of a team where it's like they could be looking for a coach very soon. They have had histories of being successful in the past. There's not really restrictions there. Like you're not have this huge recruiting pool. But to me, the money is the one thing that I think could get some of these former head coaches or current head coaches to make that move to say, oh, I'll just go to a bigger league, smaller fish in the big league, but make it work.
And for like a person like Kennedy Montalolo, like analyst money and head coach money are significantly different. Like they are significantly different. And he's not looking to go to the next level or improve. So that's a possibility. I mean, I wouldn't want to run the triple option if I was Northwestern, but he's got good leadership development.
I don't know. It could be exciting when you get the right QB with a couple of skill guys there. I don't know. I think there was quite a few wide receivers that actually ended up having solid pro careers after playing at Georgia Tech. Demaryius Thomas is the one that comes chief in mind. But he wasn't in the triple option.
Oh, is he not? I was thinking he was with Nesbitt and Dwyer. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, it's Demaryius Thomas was the guy that was with Josh Nesbitt, Jonathan Dwyer. But they had a couple others go pro. I'd have to look them up. I was just thinking about that. It just crossed my mind.
Yeah, a lot of times just go get like one substantial receiver and like that was good enough. All you needed was one really good guy, and he could take off the top, and you could have an option.
Catch 4 balls a game, 120 yards, at least 1 touchdown. But It's interesting that some of the things you described, like, yeah, I kind of had similar thoughts as to like people that are familiar with some of the challenges with working at an institution that has significant academic rigor. So that was one thought that I had. I also thought like, okay, who are some potential people that are, like you said, maybe the in the twilight of their careers, right? Like someone that maybe isn't pushing for uh, the sport's most ultimate goal in winning like a national championship or even a conference championship. And so I'd heard some other names thrown around, like Sharon Moore, the offensive coordinator at Michigan, seems to be a popular, trendy pick there. I would think he might be more ambitious, but again, I don't know the man. So um, that one to me was a little surprising because I think he could perhaps get a more attractive job from a winning perspective. Like the prospects might be a little bit stronger. Agree on Dave Clawson. Lance Leipold's one that I've seen and heard, and I was like, yeah, maybe that one makes sense. I have two others that don't necessarily fit all of those criteria that I thought of, but I think might be good ones. Brian, oh, so sorry. Before I do that, Brian, like I think Bronco Mendenhall would be the perfect like 1 year holdover. He'd be an awesome interim coach for this coming season. I don't know if I'm necessarily hiring him long term, but
Agree.
there are some candidates that have consistently dealt with challenges around whether it's recruiting restrictions or just other recruiting hurdles, maybe not necessarily academic hurdles, but maybe location, the attractiveness of the job that they're currently at, that I think might be really good candidates. My number one call, and again, it may depend slightly on how this current season shakes out. I'm assuming Northwestern's probably going to have someone act in an interim capacity this year before hiring more in the hiring season. I don't know if they've officially
So what they
announced
have
that or not.
announced, what they have announced is that all assistant coaches are going to coach through this year. At least that's
Yeah,
what I've read.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like,
But
do you think
so it's sorry about that. No, I guess the question then becomes like you wouldn't hire a new head coach and then have them work with the existing staff. I wouldn't think. Maybe you promote someone as the interim coach within that staff, or maybe you do have some sort of caretaker like Jim Grobe was at Baylor. But my thought process is, man, if Mike Elko has another good year at Duke, he could trade in one good, solid academic institution for one that's in a more prestigious conference that's probably going to pay him more money and basically have the same job, but maybe a slightly better contract and some more resources at his disposal than he has at Duke. That would be one
a lot
that would
more
be
losses
very
though? You
interesting.
know,
I, I mean, Duke is a perennial loser, and he won 9 games after they had fired their most successful head coach. So he's actually kind of done this before.
I agree. I feel like he had stuff in the closet or in the bag a little bit when he got there. Versus if you go to Northwestern, I think the cupboard's pretty bare.
True, true. So I mean, there are going to be challenges, but he's a savvy coach. He's an excellent defensive mind. The thing I love about him, he basically like, and I think we've talked about this on a previous episode, but he at one point was asked about how they were able to keep players out of the transfer portal, and he was the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, who knows how to play the game, and he said, "Look, coming where I came from, I kind of know what to expect, and so I pulled all my players aside and said, here's how you're going to be approached. This is what they're going to tell you. Anytime you have any questions, please come to me." And they had their players taken care of. Like so, he's a guy that I don't think loves participating in that level of the sport. Again, he was the defensive coordinator at Wake Forest that helped Dave Clawson take that build a winner there too. I wouldn't it wouldn't stun me if he decided like, you know what, I could do the same thing for more money with the similar or maybe even lower expectations because Cutcliffe has elevated the expectations at Duke. Fitzgerald sort of did that at Northwestern, but it's been 3 or 4 years since they really were competitive. I guess they won the Big Ten West in the COVID season, but outside of that, I think the last 3 or 4 years have all been not only losing seasons, but very heavily weighted to the loss column as opposed to the win column. Another one that I don't know if they'd be able to pull, but he's on my list to call and gauge interest, Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. Now, it's going to be hard to pull him because that's his alma mater, but that man has built a program from the bottom of the bottom. They were losers and losers big time, and now he's got them. They won 10 games last year. They look, anywhere. I guess the Vegas over under win total I think is set at 8.5 for them this year. He knows what he's doing. The question is, can you get him? And I think you might be able to with the uncertainty surrounding the Pac-12.
Yeah,
You
I'll
could
say that's your only
leverage some
shot.
of
If there's no deal
you
by
could
the end of the
leverage
year,
some things where it's like, you know what, you just don't know what's going to happen here. But we're already in, one of those the sort of power two conferences, if you want to start using that term, and the job is secure. I mean, I could see someone like that potentially being a really good fit.
yeah, I think that's an interesting one for sure. I think it would take a lot to pry him away, especially if he just talks to Oregon State and they say, "Hey, we're actually trying to join that
Yeah,
conference
Brian.
already."
It records still, so
For me, what I was going to say was I've heard Brian Hartline's name thrown out, and I was like, that's ridiculous. Have you guys heard that name thrown out?
I saw it once, and I kind of immediately dismissed it too.
I laughed at that. I'm like, if he's going to go anywhere, he's going to go to a bigger, better place. But it's interesting to me to see Brian Hartline. He's kind of taking that Dabo role. If you're looking at it, like excellent recruiter, wide receiver coach, he could jump to the next level of being a head coach, and just more focus on recruiting rather than actual X's and O's. But I don't see him wanting to stop at Northwestern. So
Yeah, I think he's too savvy of a recruiter to go to a place where he's going to have challenges to get those top tier talent, because he's doing an excellent job at Ohio State. So I would imagine, like you said, he'd be in line for somewhere else where he can compete at the highest levels, where I'm not sure you can do that with Northwestern.
Yeah, I agree. I imagine he's going to be somewhere that's going to want to compete for conference championships at the very least.
Awesome. Well, maybe let's transition now. We kind of talked through Northwestern. They actually beat us to the punch, as you remember for our loyal listeners that were here right at the start. I think our very first episode we did. Who are the first head coaches to be fired in 2022? And we had the short list. I don't know if anyone actually called Scott Frost. Like, we certainly said it, but he wasn't our vote, I don't think. I'll have to go back and review that, but I think we all kind of had circled around him, and
yeah,
gosh, who are the others? I'm blanking on who else.
Yeah, I had Harsin as my number one, who went at one point, but not the first one to go. Brian Harsin at Auburn.
Yeah, that's what I had.
I'm trying to remember who the other top ones were.
Anyway, we'll review that. We'll follow up with our listeners either via Twitter or a subsequent episode.
It was the buyout that put us off of him. And
that's right.
I can't believe they freaking pulled it anyway.
That's
You're
right.
like, the buyout has to go until like week 6. They won't fire him until week 6. But nope.
Yeah,
couple weeks
I
worth,
remember
a lot
that,
of money.
and I saw that. There was like I don't know if it was like a TikTok or a YouTube short where it was like when the buyout money hits your paycheck, and it shows that old video of him sliding down the railings down the stairs. Anyway, well, I don't feel bad for Scott Frost at all. He's doing just fine. But let's talk this year. Hot seat coaches. Who do you think? Maybe we'll list a few, and then we'll vote on who each of us is predicting as the first coach to be relieved of his duties as head coach at his current position. I started with Brian last time. Corey, putting you on the spot. You ready to roll?
I'm fine with that. So you want me to just throw out some names that I think are on the hot list?
Throw some names that you're considering. Yeah.
Neal Brown from West Virginia.
Top of my list.
I think he's on top of a lot of people's lists. The one thing that's there is the buyout. It's like a $16.7 million buyout. So like that one. I saw a couple other people put Dino Babers. Like they started off 6-0 at Syracuse. They started off 6-0 last year, and then kind of the wheels fell off, and I think they ended up like 7-6 or something like that. That's one I've considered. I'll go through my thought process in it a little bit. Then there's a bunch of other names that people had, and I'm like, I'm not buying it. The next three names I'm buying. That basically I'm assuming that probably almost all these people will be fired by the end of this year. But Jeff Hafley at Boston College, I think if they get to a bowl game, they'll retain him. But I don't see them getting back to a bowl game. You got Tom Allen at Indiana. They've won two wins. They've had 2 wins in the Big Ten since 2021. So I mean that's not good. They're in a bad situation. They've gone like 6-18 in the last like 24 games or something like that. And then I have one that I think the buyouts there. So it's an issue, but like Mel Tucker at Michigan State. You went from 11-2 season to 5-7 last year, and like your quarterback left, which you might have upgraded maybe. You lost some of your best receivers. Like I don't know where this team's going. I don't have a lot of faith in Mel Tucker right now. I mean, he did so good that first year, and then it's like he got the extension, but then after that, it's like, and if they go another like 4-8, 5-7, heaven forbid 3-9, like that's an issue. Yeah, I don't know. Those are the names I'm throwing out. I'll let you know who I think in a second.
Just some quick thoughts on some of those names. Number one, we have a lot of overlap on ours. Like, as I was going through this, I was like, man, this has a pretty distinct ACC flavor to it, where there's 3 or 4 that I'm like, I don't know. The one that I will add that you don't have, and the reason I'm a little reluctant to say it is just that it's one that I don't know how committed to playing football at the highest levels Virginia is, but Tony Elliott didn't look good. And it doesn't look better this year. It looks a lot worse, actually. So that one's one where it's like, I don't know. Maybe it is something that just give him some time. But I think the problem is that, like I mentioned, you've got Mike Elko, who is kind of in a similar situation where you had a program that has similar restrictions and maybe isn't a perennial winner. Virginia, obviously, I think was in a better position when Bronco left, but that's always going to be just kind of a challenge. And Mike Elko immediately got results at Duke, and so I think you're going to see comparisons there. Maybe it's not totally fair. So that was one I would potentially add to your list. With the Mel Tucker one, like, I mean, I don't know if they have the money to do it, but it makes me think, like, I've heard this where they basically said, like, Kenneth Walker kind of was the eraser. And that's the way I think about Dalvin Cook at the end of Jimbo Fisher's tenure at Florida State. Was like, Dalvin Cook, by being a fantastic individual player, covered up a lot of holes on his team. Problem is that Kenneth Walker was only at Michigan State for 1 year, and Florida State got Dalvin Cook for 3. So that situation at up in East Lansing, I don't know how they feel, because now they've made a giant contractual investment in Mel Tucker. I feel like they've made that bed, and now they have to sleep in it for at least a couple more years.
I just looked this up, and I think it was right.
Sure.
The new contract was for $95 million for 10 years, but it didn't change the buyout terms.
Really?
So this is an article that I'm reading. Let's see real quick. As of October 29, 2022, they say the buyout was 2.5 before January 15th, 2022, 2.2 million in 2023, and 1.5 in 2024. Now, if that hasn't changed,
really,
that's
you
extremely
can get out of a substantial contract and go get a better coach for way, way less.
Whoa, that changes things. Who wrote that?
I just pulled something up from Boardroom. I'll pull up another, see if I can confirm it. But I was like, I'm seeing Saturday Down South. This is in 2021. So I don't see anything else different. But yeah, buyout terms are 2.5, or we're in 2023, 2 million, and in 2024, 1.5. That's as reported in Saturday Down South 2 years ago. I don't know if I see anything more modern.
I think
that's when he signed his contract.
Maybe ahead of the contract extension, but still, yeah. If you can get him on the cheap, then he maybe moves up higher on my list. That was something that I was a little concerned with. A couple others that I'll throw in there. We touched on a few of them. We didn't talk Jimbo Fisher yet. This one to me is kind of boomer bust. Like, I feel like if when I say boomer bust, like to me he has to boom or he will bust. Let me put it that way. I think
What
if
is
they don't win
boom
9
defined for
games,
you?
I think if they don't win 9 games, I think he could be shown the door.
Wow.
I'd probably put the bar for this season a little bit lower, but one
You
win
would?
lower only.
Yeah.
Because they haven't.
I don't know.
consistently
I don't know if
done
I
that to
accept
this
8
point.
and 4 as what this is what his 7th year. Is that right?
Sixth, I
Is it
think.
his
I mean,
sixth
it's
year?
Texas A&M.
Sixth
When are
year.
they ever above 8-4? Come on.
But the thing is, they're trying to
Fair.
pay for above 8-4. So that's like the part where you look at it. It's like, well, I thought I was buying a top 5 coach when I got this guy, and
Yeah.
now we look at it and this is not a top 5 coach anymore.
Yeah,
I
they
do think-
handed him an undated national championship placard. Like,
Ugh. And it
anyway,
will
so I'll throw
remain
that one
undated.
out there. Yeah, it may never be dated. I am a little surprised. Like, that one again. I think I just don't see that situation with him and the new coaches or with the new offensive coordinator. I just don't see that. Either it will work or it won't. It feels like that one's going to go one of two ways. Like I've said before, it won't be boring either way. But that's a fascinating one. And the interesting thing about that is that it would potentially kick off a ton of things. That Texas A&M job, who doesn't want that one? I mean, they're the ones who reset the market with a $75 million 10-year deal a few years back, and then have now again since given him another raise to keep him one of the highest paid coaches and one of the ones that per win is one of the more expensive coaches that you can buy.
Is it like $1 million per win right now?
Something like
Yeah,
that. I
it's
mean, they
him
went
and Mario
4-8
going
this
for that
last
title.
year, so it's probably 1.7 or something like that per win. Not good. So I'll add that one to the list. Brian, did you have any? What did we miss?
That you guys have summed up my entire list between those. Jimbo Fisher was going to be the only one I was going to throw out that you and Corey hadn't already addressed. I'm a little bit higher on Dino Babers, a little bit higher on his ability to get fired this year, I should say, than it sounds like Corey is. But heavy ACC, but not based on the schools we've talked about, with the exceptions of Michigan State and Texas A&M, not huge jobs that are opening up in our projection this year. So it'll be interesting to see where things may lie with upcoming big head coaches. Like, do they settle for a job that maybe doesn't have quite the legs that maybe a Nebraska does for Matt Rule, or Wisconsin opened up this last year, which is a big one for Luke Fickell. Like, you can go really far, not necessarily all the way, maybe, but these ones seem like, if Syracuse opens up, if Virginia opens up, if Boston College opens up, what does that really mean for the just general landscape?
Yeah, not traditional destination jobs is what you'd say.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say, yeah.
So you're going to need a coach an okay recruiter, a better coach, to go into a middling school to eventually get to a higher school. There's not going to be any big schools open. I agree, and that's weird to kind of see. Like, there won't. It's not to not expect there to be big schools open this year. Like,
yeah, it's rare that. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, and you still have like Scott Frost on the market. Like, I'm surprised no one picked him up last year.
I think they just don't know what to make of him. You've seen two very different Scott Frosts with UCF and with, just losing close game after close game after close game, and in situations where you go, yeah, I think that's probably his fault. So
yeah,
it's tough to know exactly what to make of him.
Yeah, but like, I'd still hire him as an OC or offensive analyst or something like that. What's he even doing nowadays? Like, I don't think he's doing anything.
Yeah, we checked a couple episodes ago. We couldn't find anything.
Yeah, him and Jim Leonard are the big question marks for me. Like, why are they not anywhere?
Yeah,
Jim Leonard more so than,
because he's a
he's much more
Scott
desirable.
Frost.
He would be an on-field coach regardless. Scott Frost is, maybe you'd want him on field, but you could also do a Cliff Kingsbury thing with him, where you're just like, let's just, bring in somebody who's got a good brain and
or like
pick at that.
Florida State did. They brought in some defensive coordinator basically to fix their defensive coordinator, but he was an analyst.
brought in Jim Levitt as an analyst to run the defense.
That was like 3 years ago, wasn't it? And then they ended up finally moving on from like.
Well, they both
Yeah.
got moved on from. The whole staff got moved on from.
So for my pick of who goes down first, what I'm always worried about is buyouts and schedule. So I got to look at the schedule. I got to look at who and your opportunities to win and lose. So I have, let's go Neal Brown first, West Virginia. You play you play Penn State. That's a loss. You play Duquesne, probably win. You play Pitt, Texas Tech, and TCU. Probably all losses. You're looking at 1-5 to start the season. High probability you're fired pretty early on. If you win one or two of those, you might be able to last a little bit longer. We'll see. Let's move on to Tom Allen from Indiana. You open up the season, Ohio State. You got Indiana State, Louisville, Akron, Maryland. I think you probably lose to Ohio State, Louisville, and Maryland. If you lose to Akron or Indiana State, you're probably gone too. That's not something that can happen. I'm looking at Michigan State. You've got Richmond. Oh, no, sorry. Let me start off the top. You've got Central Michigan, probably win there. Richmond probably win, although you never know. If you're Virginia playing Richmond, you're always going to lose that game. You got Washington, which is probably you're probably going to lose, and Maryland will probably play you pretty strongly. So you start off maybe 2-2, and then you go against Iowa, the Fighting, Friends family, and what? You might win that game. You never know if their offense is going to show up or not. So you end up start off 2-2, maybe 2-3, 3-2. We'll see. And then Syracuse. I'm looking at Dino Babers real quick. You start off against Colgate, Western Michigan, Purdue, Army. Then you go Clemson, UNC. You start off with a chance to go 3-1 pretty easily here. But if you can steal a win against Purdue, you might have Syracuse ranked again in the top 20 and be at 4-0 to start the season. So my pick after looking all that, I had Boston College on there as well. Let me pull up Boston College's schedule.
I've got it. You want me to read it?
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Yeah, they start against NIU, then they play Holy Cross.
Yeah.
Then they play Florida State at Louisville, home against Virginia, at Army, bye week, at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, so I'm like, Northern Illinois, you probably win that game, but you never know. Holy Cross, you win. You're going to lose to Florida State. You're going to lose to Louisville. And if you lose for Virginia, you're gone. Like, in my process. But my first pick is Neal Brown from West Virginia. I feel like that schedule is hard. I feel like your talent is not there. And I feel like it's everybody's first pick, which just kind of sucks. But I think that's the right one. I think the consensus is that. Do they have Vegas odds on who will get fired first in coaches?
I don't know.
That'd be so awesome. I'll look it up.
You can bet on anything. I'm sure it exists somewhere. Someone's going to be willing to take your money.
I feel like that one's really tough in terms of, what if there's somebody who knows about a Northwestern situation and they're like, well, if I just air this story real quick, then you can make good money. So that one's a little bit trickier than like a game result, but yeah, typically you can't bet on just about anything. So there's got to be somewhere you have these odds.
I found a place called bookie.com real quick. And so it's like nothing important. But they have Neal Brown at 33%, Jeff Hafley at 33%, Jimbo Fisher at 16%. They have Justin Wilcox from California, which none of us mentioned.
I thought about putting him on my list. Another one, I'm curious, do they have Dana Holgerson?
They don't have Dana Holgerson. They do. This is pre-Pat Fitzgerald, and I have Pat Fitzgerald at 11.1% at plus 800 odds. So there you go. If you bet that one. It's not a bad return.
Yikes. They haven't pulled it yet. Maybe we should see if we can sneak something in. Sneak one by them. Anyway.
No, it's a little old.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm looking at Dana Holgerson right now, and I like, man. So they open. Things did not go well for them last year, and they had a lot of transfer defections, and they also have a big benefactor in Tillman Fertitta, who owns the Houston Rockets, is a UH alum. huge Houston guy, huge fan of the football program, and it's not doing well. So I think he'd be one that maybe is like, now that we're in the Big 12, we can't afford to be at the bottom of it for very long before we get just established as that. Go ahead, Corey.
Well, and like if you're in Houston, the talent in Houston is good, and in an NL world where you have a big benefactor like that, you should be pulling a Miami a little bit and buying all the players around you that you can. And even though you went 5-7 the year before, you should be able to get the number 7th ranked recruiting class. Maybe not that high, but like they should be able to recruit right there and do well. But if Dana Holgerson is not his guy, then I can see them pulling that plug. I think that's a great call, Steve.
Yeah, and they open against UTSA. There's a benchmark game for you. If you're not beating out the team that's now in the Sun Belt, where are they now? Conference USA. They just changed, didn't they? I'm gonna get this wrong. Let's see. They are in the American. I got it mixed up. Yeah, I think they were in Conference USA, and now they're in the American. But you've just upgraded from that conference. If you're still behind them, now the problem is that they play at Rice the next week, which I expect them to win. If they lose that one, game over, I'm pretty sure. TCU, even Sam Houston State, you get 4 teams from Texas that are all kind of benchmark games. TCU, I don't think anyone would realistically expect them to win that game, but that's the only one that's like you're not expected to win. And Sam Houston State, like, I know that they're new to FBS. That's not a bad program. Like that they won a national championship at the FCS level, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So they don't suck. And Houston might this year. We'll have to see. There's another one that just came to me that didn't make my list earlier, but I'll admit it wasn't quite as exhaustive of research as I sometimes have done for these types of things. But anyway, I will go on record and say I think the first one to be fired is Hafley. And I'm sad to say it. I like him. Like, he's a guy that if he's fired, I want him as my defensive coordinator. And I'm not sure if he might just ride off into the sunset, but if he's willing to be on my staff, like I want that guy. He's a good tactician, is from defense, strong recruiter. Boston College is a really tough place to coach and be successful. Very few do it. And it's usually because they catch lightning in a bottle and happen to have like a 5-star defensive end or Matthias Kiwanuka or the quarterback who's now, I can see his face, lost the Super Bowl 28-3.
Matt Ryan.
Matt Ryan, thank you. I couldn't think of his name.
I couldn't find my unmute button.
I'm gonna go with Hafley.
There you go.
Brian.
I mean, I'm not going to choose one of the ones you guys chose just because I want to win and I don't want to have to share that victory. And I'm going to go with one who goes a little bit against the principles that Corey's working off of because they do have an easy early schedule. I'm going to go with Dino Babers. I think Syracuse have been looking to get rid of Dino Babers for a second now, but the problem was last year they went 5-0 to start. And it's like, I can't fire him now. Like, we're winning. Schrader looks awesome. Robert Nye's got this offense humming. But Robert Nye's gone, and so is Schrader, and so is a lot of significant transfers that have left from Syracuse. Am I wrong? Is Schrader still there,
gone?
Steve?
Is Schrader gone?
Double check that for me.
I think he's still there.
My bad. But
and
we're under a new
Jason Banks
offense.
is their OC, I think, who was already in charge of the passing game ahead of time, early, like last year. So I don't expect a lot of issues kind of moving on. Like that's someone who was already familiar with the offense that Robert and I was running. So that was the only reason I didn't throw him on there as well too. Like think that he's.
I just can't see them going 3. I think they're going to drop one of those early games, and I think Syracuse is going to go. We haven't had this chance to fire Dino. We've been looking for it for a while now. Here it is. I think he's.
And I do not disagree with you.
I think he has the shortest leash. So because if he has those games those are all expected, like when we went over Neal Brown's schedule, West Virginia's schedule, a lot of those are expected losses. So like you may not be quick to get him after like 1-3, but like you'll wait till it gets to like 1-5. 2-2 would be enough, I think, to get rid of Dino. And that's the thing is I think the leash is so much shorter that if they stumble out of the blocks, you have that Purdue game, which is a possible loss. If you lose against Army, that could be it. So. In my heart of hearts, Neal Brown is really who I think it's going to be. But because I want to win and because I want to have the win all to myself, I'm going to say Dino Babers is my pick for the first one to get fired this year. Steven, you gave in a Sorry, Corey. Just one sec. Steve, you gave a last second Dana Holgerson shout. We were focusing a lot more on the not FBS, on the Power 5 teams. Ryan Silverfield is also in my consideration set at Memphis. They've gotten accustomed to a certain level of success under Fuente and then taken to another level with Norvell, and that's dropped down quite a bit. They do have a light early schedule, and I think if that firing was to come, it would be later in the season. But one who wouldn't shock me if he went mid-season before we get to the final week.
Your comment on Dino, though, about Syracuse wanting to fire him, he's been on the short list for like 3 years running and just managed to skirt it by. And so it's like, I do agree with you on like that. Like, they're looking for a reason. He's just managing like dodge.
He's doing just good enough.
He's got 9 lives, and I love it. I love it. Well, and the thing is, like, the way I see it playing out at Syracuse, again, if disaster strikes from the perspective of Dino Babers, you probably, I think, I've got him going 2-0 at Purdue. That's probably a loss. Home against Army. Then after this 3-game stretch, you could probably, you've got
he's definitely gone at the end of that.
At North Carolina, at Florida State, bye week. So you could definitely see them being like 2-4, 2-5, 2-5 after that stretch, making the change in the bye week that gives whoever the interim is an extra week to kind of get organized and try and get the players refocused for a game at Lane Stadium where Virginia Tech may not be very inspired to play. So anyway, that's kind of how I see Syracuse playing out if the worst were to happen for Syracuse fans.
The other thing that we have to remember is like teams and schools nowadays fire early so that you can get on recruiting and try and hire early. Although if we look at last year, they couldn't hire early. No teams were able to hire all that early, and so they still had crappy recruiting classes. So maybe they won't take the same philosophy.
Yeah, but like I'm curious who's going to be the first surprise firing, because last year like we did this exercise and we threw out lots of names like we did this year, and it's pretty not super exhaustive, but like pretty thorough. And Paul Chris went really early, and none of us had him on the block. We did not see that coming, and so it can be a combination of a team or a school is more ambitious than we anticipated, and they're not willing to put up with as little success, or a team underperforms way more than we're expecting, and it gets cut short. But I'm intrigued to see who's the first person who's not on our list currently who goes.
True. But one thing that I'll not push back on, but like, I remember when Scott Frost was fired last year, and I understood you probably had to do it because some donor was probably like, I'm not giving another penny until that guy is out, clean his office out, which I get. But also, like, I think if I'm an athletic director, I think I have to look at the end of a season and be like, okay, in the first 5 weeks, if the worst were to happen, do I see myself firing this guy? If the answer is yes, I might just fire him now. And get rid of it. Like, I mean, obviously, buyouts change, and there's more that comes into it. But, like, I remember when he was let go, I was just like, why did you even think this would work for one more year?
Yeah, because if you do it right now, you still have fall camp, you have fall transfers potentially. Like, you can actually get a team going, and then you can actually have you can recoup recruiting class, and then you have, because of the unlimited visits, you can have visitors come to your school, and you can try and flip people during the season.
Yeah. Well, I was more saying, like, at the end of last season, like, going into this year, I'm saying there's any scenario, if we go 0-4 in the first 4 games, am I firing this person? If the answer is yes, like, then I mean, there has to be that thing where it's like, is there any scenario where I'm going to get rid of this guy before a third of the season's done, or maybe just after a third of the season's done? And if the answer is yes, like, all right, that means that we're probably headed down that path anyway. I love, there's a quote from Jeremy Foley, who is the athletic director at the University of Florida for a long time. This quote doesn't always apply, but I love the thought process of it. It's like, that which has to be done eventually should be done immediately. Like, if I'm going to do it eventually, I might as well do it now. Which again is not always true. Like, when you're cooking, you can't add an ingredient ahead of something, so it doesn't always apply. But in this case, I think it might, where it's like, you know what? There's a good chance I fire this guy, especially if he has a bad start. If that's the case, why don't we just?
At the same time, Steve, there's a lot of teams that are gonna, like, if they have a bad start, you're gonna fire him. Like, if Ohio State went 0-5, you'd consider firing Ryan Day. So it's like you have to weigh the probability with the fact that, like,
Yeah,
All
no,
right, yeah,
I
maybe
think it's
it's an
interesting.
extreme example, but you get my point, right? Like, if there's like, it would have disaster beyond disaster would strike Ohio State for them to go 0 and whatever. Basically, even 0 and 1. Don't they open with Indiana? So like, anyway, like that's my point. Is like if there's like, man, if we are below a certain threshold, like 3 or 4 games in the season, and it's going to be the point where I have to fire this guy, like that means that our relationship or his traction so far is probably so bad that it might just make sense for me to cut ties now and get a new guy established. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I wonder if you could see in the future a trend of like savvy ads who you have immediate coach firings after the schedule drops because you realize like it's one thing if you're going to start 4-2 and then end up 5-7. It's another thing to start off 1-4 and end up 5-7, right? Like it kind of tanks your recruiting, makes it tough on things, or you can always kind of sell. Yeah, we got banged up a little bit. It got hard down the stretch of the season for that reason, but you can see the potential because look at how we started. That's always something you can kind of sell and preserve a little bit. But if you look at the schedule and it drops, it just go, oh, we're gonna start 1-4, 2 or 3. At my best estimation, I'm just gonna fire my coach right now and get somebody else.
at the same time,
That's the time where I think it would make sense. It's like you see the schedule, you have your projection of what's the best. Because looking at the best situation of what I think is going to happen for Neal Brown and for Dino Babers this season, I think there's a 0% chance that they make it out of the season not fired. And I think their ADs probably know that. But they probably also knew that when the schedule dropped and maybe should have just worked then.
at the same time, what coach is going to move into that position and be like, listen, I already know I'm going to go 1-5, and now I'm going to try and recruit with that? No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, the negative
you-
recruiting is the thing that you would probably run into. Like, don't
Maybe
go
so,
there. They're
but-
going to fire their coach right in the middle of summer for no reason.
No, I think what you can do is you can say, look, we hire a long-term guy similar to a Florida State with a Mike Norvell who ends up going 3 wins, right? And you say, we understand how long of a process this is. We need guys who are going to be here and who are going to play for us for the next 3 years. Like, you're going to be on the field because we need to turn this stuff around. This coach is going to be here. Like, you get the AD involved as much as you can in the recruiting and say, we understand the projects that's before us. This is what we're doing. Come be a part of that. I think there's a way to sell it. It's tough, and certainly negative recruiting will be rampant. But I think it's a more savvy move, honestly, than firing midseason and losing your entire class.
I mean, that's essentially what Florida State ended up doing when they fired Willie Taggart in the middle of the second season. That's so early, so quick. And they're like, listen, this guy isn't meeting our standard. We're done. And, like, he get 1 year to kind of meet it, and then the second year is like, oh, yeah, he's definitely not meeting it. The second they knew, they pulled it. And you did. You got the AD, the president, and the coach all in line going, okay. And the boosters were in line. They told the top boosters, this is going to be a long process. This is not going to be a quick turnaround. So, although that national media said that Norvell was on the hot seat, anybody who knew anything about Florida State knew that he wasn't really on the hot seat.
Yeah.
It's
similar.
Valid possibility. Yeah. Sorry, Steve. Brian.
Well, there's a little bit of dead air time. Sorry about that. No, your podcast didn't start buffering. That was just us figuring out who's going to talk next. So yeah, I mean it's interesting. It's fascinating. We've kind of covered that, and so we'll see of those 3 who potentially is the first, and we'll keep a little eye on Silverfield, which Brian snuck in at the last minute to just let everyone know, hey,
It's
there's,
not my
there's a
pick.
group
I'm just
of 5.
saying, would be shocked if
There's a
he
group of 5
doesn't
guy
go before the end of the year.
we may want to keep an eye on as well. As far as other topics, I don't have anything else. I think we might wrap unless there's something from y'all. Parting shots? No?
Nope.
All right. We'll keep this one. We'll wrap it there. Thanks again for listening to CFB Paint. Actually, before we go, there is, kind of something that's been a tradition of ours. The win totals draft will drop next week. Get excited for it. Get pumped. Team Steve is going to come back with a fury that no one has ever seen before. So excited to unleash hell on the 3 of y'all. And yeah.
So just to give our listeners an insight, Steve was like, "Hey, I haven't had a chance to research this, so let's push it till next week." And I turned to him and go, "Do you think that will help?"
Yeah.
You researched it last year.
Yeah, for newer listeners, I came in last. To quickly describe the win totals draft, we each draft teams, and whoever has the highest win count at the end of the regular season, the 12 games that constitute the regular season, is our winner. And I was by far the loser, so I am looking forward to making strides. And
we're gonna have a punishment this next year, and I'm ready to take it.
yeah, I was gonna say. I think the statute of limitations on my punishment for this last year is evaporated. Y'all had your opportunities to come up with stuff. Nothing was agreed upon. Nothing was.
Yeah, I suggested a few things. You didn't like them.
Yeah, I don't think you ever got unanimity amongst the other three. So
I suggested all.
If you guys all said yes,
and every bowl of pasta you ate reduced an hour, and you're like, I'm not doing that.
Be brutal. Be brutal.
I feel like it'd be fun to show up around hour number 3 and just see like how you doing, and then pop out.
I'd be 4 bowls in and miserable.
I'll see you in 16 hours.
Bingo. Anyway, for the CFB Paint team, this is Steve. Thanks, Corey and Brian, for joining. Signing off. We'll see y'all next week. Peace.